Dear brothers and sisters, peace be with you. Today, I would like to explore a topic that we frequently encounter in our daily lives: majority rule. This principle is widely used in our society, whether in family, schools, workplaces, or even in government decisions. We often hear or use the phrase, "the minority should submit to the majority." But is this principle always right? What does the Bible say about this? Today, we will reflect on this issue from a biblical perspective and consider the limitations and appropriate use of majority rule. 1. The pitfalls of majority rule. The trial of Jesus. Let us first look at a well-known event in the Bible, the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. In Matthew 27, we read about how the religious leaders and the crowds gathered before Pilate, demanding the release of Barabbas, a criminal, instead of Jesus, who was innocent. When Pilate asked the crowd what should be done with Jesus, they shouted, "Crucify him." This is a clear example of how the majority can sometimes be driven by emotions, misinformation, and injustice. Jesus was condemned to die on the cross due to the overwhelming demand of the crowd. This incident forces us to ask a critical question: is the majority always right? In this case, we clearly see that the outcome of the majority decision did not represent truth or justice, but was driven by emotion and bias. The Bible, therefore, cautions us to be wary of majority rule, especially when it comes to decisions about life, morality, and justice. 2. The faith of the minority, Caleb and Joshua. Another important example comes from Numbers 13:14, where Moses sent 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan. When the spies returned, 10 of them gave a negative report, filled with fear of the enemies in Canaan, which stirred up fear and disbelief among the Israelites. Only Caleb and Joshua stood firm, believing in God's promise and plan. Here, we see a different scenario. While the majority was driven by fear and disbelief, the minority chose to stand in faith. God ultimately rewarded Caleb and Joshua, allowing them to enter the promised land, while the majority, who gave into fear, were left behind. This story teaches us that the choice of faith is not always determined by the majority. In critical moments, we must follow God's guidance, even if it means standing with the minority. 3. Appropriate situations for majority rule. So, does this mean that majority rule should never be used? Of course not. In many daily situations, using majority rule is an effective and fair way to make decisions. For example, when making decisions like what should we eat tonight, hot pot or steak. This type of decision does not involve right or wrong and has no long-term consequences. It is merely a matter of personal preference. In such cases, majority rule helps the group quickly reach a consensus and avoid unnecessary disputes. In everyday decisions that are relatively harmless, majority rule can be a useful tool. Examples include deciding group activities such as choosing where to go for a family outing, choosing preferences within a group like which book to read, movie to watch, or activity to participate in, minor decisions at work like determining meeting times or document formats. These examples show that when the decision is about personal preference or has no significant long-term impact, majority rule is an effective tool. 4. The limitations and dangers of majority rule. However, when we face decisions that involve morality, life, or human rights, majority rule is not always appropriate. The reason is that the majority's choice may not always reflect true justice or righteousness. As we saw in the trial of Jesus, majority decisions can sometimes be swayed by emotion and misinformation, leading to unjust outcomes. Modern-day mob rule is another example. When the majority is driven by emotion and lacks thoughtful reflection, decisions often end up violating the rights of the minority. The Bible warns us not to blindly follow the voice of the majority, but to seek God's guidance, respect justice, and uphold truth. Thus, when facing decisions involving moral choices or affecting others' rights, we must be cautious in using majority rule. In such cases, we should seek God's wisdom, ensuring that our decisions are not based solely on the preferences of the majority, but aligned with God's justice. 5. Conclusion. In conclusion, the principle of the minority should submit to the majority is appropriate in some contexts, especially when we are dealing with inconsequential daily decisions. However, the Bible teaches us to be cautious in applying this principle, particularly in matters of life, morality, and justice. The crucifixion of Jesus reminds us that majority rule should not be the only standard of judgment. Sometimes the voice of the minority is the one that upholds truth and justice. Our faith calls us to seek God's guidance rather than relying solely on the voice of the majority. Whether we find ourselves in the majority or minority, we must always be guided by truth and righteousness. May God grant us the wisdom to make decisions that honor His will. Amen. I hope this message has helped you understand the appropriate use of majority rule and how we can seek wisdom from biblical teachings. May God bless you all.